Hi, you are watching Voice of Canada and I'm Sana Haroon. Today we are discussing about what kind of family violence are observing these days in Canada society. And we have a guest from Sheila Vatina and she's a coordinator over there. Her name is Polly Son. Welcome to the studio, Polly Sonis, and thank you so much for your precious time. As you know, we want to discuss regarding family violence. So, what kind of family violence are observing in Canadian society these days?
Well, there's many different types of conjugal and family violence. The one that I think is most obvious to people that we can recognize is the physical violence, right? It's obvious. Physical violence can be, when somebody pushes you, it hits you, kicks you, pulls your hair, even spitting on somebody is considered physical violence. Then we have other types of abuse, like the verbal and psychological, which is less obvious, especially to people on the outside. But, the effects of it are still very harmful to the victims. The victims, a lot of times, actually say that the effects of the psychological violence are much stronger and harder to get over. So psychological violence, when you insult somebody and constantly put them down, and it really affects a person's self-esteem. We also have the economic violence, where a lot of we also have the economic violence, where a lot of times, the victim is not allowed to go to work, and sometimes when the victim is working and does get some money, they are obliged to give it to the person who is abusing them. um, there's also lately what we are starting to recognize. It probably existed from before, but it's becoming more and more recognized. It's something that we're calling spiritual violence. A lot of times the victim is not allowed to practice their religion, or another religion is imposed on them, or a lot of times the abuser will use religion to justify the violence. And lastly, we have sexual violence, and sexual violence is something very, very difficult for victims to talk about. And I think one of the biggest myths in all societies is that sexual violence happens, to women. Let's say they're walking down the street at night and they are attacked. Yes, for sure, things like that happen. But in most cases, the victim knows the person who is sexually violent towards them. And a lot of times it can even be their partner. So there are many types of violence.
All right. When is aggression and family violence appropriate under certain circumstances?
When is what? Can you repeat the question?
When is aggression and family violence appropriate under circumstances?
Well, in terms of conjugal violence, the aggressor will use the physical violence in order to have power and control over the other person. So that is basically the root. That is where it all comes from and what its purpose is. It's to have power and control over the other person. And not just the aggressiveness, but any type of violence. The abuser is going to use a type of violence in order to have power and control over the victim. Even with economic abuse, if the victim, again, is not allowed to work or not allowed to have a bank account, not allowed to have a bank card, again, it's a way to have power and control. So all the different types of violence that one person will impose on somebody else, the purpose is to have power and control over them.
Okay. What are resources for available for victims?
Well, here we have a lot of resources. There's a lot of services like the Shield of Athena and other women's centers where the victim can go, make an appointment. These services are confidential because we know the subject matter, is very touchy, and we need to keep it confidential for the safety of the women. So usually when they go to a women's organization, it is confidential, it is by appointment. They meet a worker that's going to guide them. First of all their options are explained to them, and then they can proceed on the path that they want to take. Now, sometimes the situation is very dangerous. Us here, we have two offices where the women can come by appointment, have a consultation, and then they go back home. But sometimes the violence has escalated to a very dangerous point. So the women are scared to be home. They're scared for their lives, so they have to leave. So in situations like that, there's other type of resources, which are the shelters. The shelters, again, they're confidential places where a woman can go with her children if she fears that her life is in danger. Because they're confidential, the way she finds them is usually by calling the police or by calling another resource like a women's center. And then she is taken, arrangements are made to take her to the emergency shelter, where she can stay usually for about 2 months. And again, over there, she receives many different types of services, mostly consultations, interventions, support groups. The only difference is that she's staying at the shelter. Usually they're for about a period of 2 months. When the woman, after the 2 months, she's usually ready to leave. I mean, we do a lot of work with her, and we always make sure that she has a place to go after the 2 months. If she is not completely ready to leave, obviously we will make some extra time for her to stay at our shelter. But then again, once she leaves the shelter and has her own place, if she continues to need services, follow-up services, she's welcome to receive services for as long as she needs.
When is aggression and family violence appropriate under circumstances?
Well, in terms of conjugal violence, the aggressor will use the physical violence in order to have power and control over the other person. So that is basically the root. That is where it all comes from and what its purpose is. It's to have power and control over the other person. And not just the aggressiveness, but any type of violence. The abuser is going to use a type of violence in order to have power and control over the victim. Even with economic abuse, if the victim, again, is not allowed to work or not allowed to have a bank account, not allowed to have a bank card, again, it's a way to have power and control. So all the different types of violence that one person will impose on somebody else, the purpose is to have power and control over them.
Okay, what are resources for available for victims?
Well, here we have a lot of resources. There's a lot of services like the Shield of Athena and other women's centers where the victim can go, make an appointment. These services are confidential because we know the subject matter, is very touchy, and we need to keep it confidential for the safety of the women. So usually when they go to a women's organization, it is confidential. It is by appointment. They meet a worker that's going to guide them. First of all their options are explained to them, and then they can proceed on the path that they want to take. Now, sometimes the situation is very dangerous. Us here, we have two offices where the women can come by appointment, have a consultation, and then they go back home. But sometimes the violence has escalated to a very dangerous point. So the women are scared to be home. They're scared for their lives, so they have to leave. So in situations like that, there's other type of resources, which are the shelters. The shelters, again, they're confidential places where a woman can go with her children if she fears that her life is in danger. Because they're confidential, the way she finds them is usually by calling the police or by calling another resource like a women's center. And then she is taken, arrangements are made to take her to the the emergency shelter, where she can stay usually for about 2 months. And again, over there, she receives many different types of services, mostly consultations, interventions, support groups. The only difference is that she's staying at the shelter. Usually they're for about a period of 2 months. When the woman, after the 2 months, she's usually ready to leave. I mean, we do a lot of work with her, and we always make sure that she has a place to go after the 2 months. If she is not completely ready to leave, obviously we will make some extra time for her to stay at our shelter. But then again, once she leaves the shelter and has her own place, if she continues to need services, follow-up services, she's welcome to receive services for as long as she needs.
Okay, Polly, can you tell me what are the reasons victim law authorities initially and keep themselves victimized?
It's That's the big question that a lot of people always ask. Why does she stay? And just to give you two statistics before I answer that question, which they're Canadian statistics, but I do believe more or less around the world it is the same. One statistic when it comes to Canadian police, they say that a woman will have been beaten 35 times before she calls the police. So that is the average. So when we look at the spectrum, yes, we have the women on this end where they will call, let's say, the first time it happens. But then on the other extreme, we have the women that will never call. Another interesting statistic is that women will leave the abusive relationship, but they will go back an average of 7 times before they leave for good. So yes, like you said, a lot of times they stay and they don't leave and they don't call for help. Now, why? There's many reasons. A lot of women stay for the children. Obviously, if they have children, they think staying with the father, even if he's abusive, they believe that it is better for the children's upbringing. But again, statistics have shown that this is not healthy. Yes, both parents are together, but it is a very scary environment for the kids. The kids, they suffer at school because they can't focus in the class. They're constantly worried about what will happen at home. How can they protect their mother? Their grades suffer. The boys become aggressive, because they learn. Our parents are our models. So the little boys, they learn, oh, to be a man means to be tough. Little girls, they see their mom as their model, and they say, oh, okay, a woman is supposed to tolerate these things. So a lot of times the women stay for the kids, but it's not healthy. A lot of times they stay because they don't have money. They haven't been allowed to work. So where are they going to go? They have nowhere. They have no money for an apartment, anything, for food. A lot of times they stay because of community pressure and family pressure. We're taught a lot of times, you're the woman, you're the mom, you have to stay, be patient, have hope that he will change, try to be nicer. And a lot of times there's a big stigma when a woman leaves and is divorced. So it's very hard to leave if you know that everybody's going to talk bad about you. And I think one of the two other big reasons, one is love. I would say that the abused woman still loves her partner because she doesn't love the abuse. No. And it's very silly when a lot of times people say she stays because she likes it or she loves it. No, nobody likes to be abused, but they do love their partner, because we marry someone, right, to be with them forever, not to separate. So they do love their partner, and a lot of times the abuse has not started from the beginning. So there's very good memories. There's still good moments in the relationship. So you have happy times and you always have hope that he's going to change. And then the last reason that I would say that women stay is fear. A lot of times the abusive partners will threaten the victim. They will tell her, if you leave, I'm going to find you, I'm going to kill you. And she's terrified, and these are not just threats. We have seen here lately in Quebec and Canada, a lot of murders of women. And what has been interesting is that these murders have happened after she has left. So it really is a dangerous time for her. After a woman leaves, they say is the most dangerous time where the violence will escalate to the point of murder. And why? Because, like I said before, it all comes down to power and control. When the woman decides to leave, the abusive person feels like they've lost control. So this is the end of the cycle of violence. This is the last step that he takes to regain that control that he feels he has lost.
Okay, what is the role of Shield of Athena for awareness in society?
Oh, for awareness, it's very important to do public awareness. And it's unfortunately, when it comes to conjugal violence, it's very difficult. Everybody talks about prevention and awareness. And I think when we talk about any other topic, let's say I always give the example of medical professionals, doctors doing public awareness, about cholesterol or diabetes, or everybody's interested. Everybody wants to listen to what the professionals say. Everybody's gonna do the right things, the suggestions. Nobody gets mad when a doctor tells you to avoid fried foods, to keep your cholesterol levels down. But doing prevention when it comes to conjugal violence, it's very different, but we have found a very sensitive way of doing it. We reach out to many, to society at large and to many communities to show them the services here in Quebec, the laws that are in place, to protect the victims, and also the laws, because there's going to be consequences if you are violent. You can lose your children, you can have a criminal record. So the public awareness is very important, and it's also very important to continue reaching out to society at large, because yes, it's important to work with the victim, right? Because she's being abused and she's in danger, and we have to break the cycle, but we have to really change perceptions in the communities to show them that they have to support the victims when they leave. Because if they're not going to be supported, it's very likely that they're going to stay in very, very dangerous situations. Also, for the public awareness, I want to stress one thing. We do public awareness, a lot of public awareness. This past year, we did 83 information sessions, and we always invite the men. We always invite the men, because from the beginning, we saw that it's important to include them. We don't think that all men are bad and they are abusive, not at all, okay? And a lot of times from the beginning, when we started 30 years ago and we started doing public awareness, there were men calling us because they wanted to help the women in their lives that were victims. Sometimes it was their mom, sometimes it was their sister, sometimes it was their daughter. So you cannot exclude the men, okay? They have to be, they're not just part of the problem. They are very well part of the solution as well. And we need to equip people, with information about what they can do to help women that are in dangerous situations.
Okay, Polly, can you tell me, family violence abusers show any potential warning signs?
Everything is different and every relationship is different. Sometimes a lot of people say when the person is controlling, let's say they start to criticize members of your family, they start to criticize your friends. It's a way maybe to try to isolate you. If they don't want you to work, and they want to keep you at home, it might be another way to isolate you and have control over you. If they're constantly constantly messaging you and wanting to know where you are, that can also be a red flag. Again, it doesn't mean that it's a red flag, it's going to mean that the person is going to end up violent, but they are little red flags to just, be aware of. And I think, like, for example, the economic thing, like I said, if he doesn't want you to go to work, if you are fine with that, that is fine. But when you say, no, I would like to go to work as well and contribute, and I feel good about myself. And if he understands and you come to a compromise, that is fine. But then if you also say, oh, great, I get to stay home and take care of the kids and, prepare the meals and focus on really being a housewife and my priorities there. If that is okay with you, that is fine. I think the problem is, when you express your opinion about how he wants something, but if he's resistant to compromise, I think that is a big sign.
Our second topic is the role of society against family violence. What do you think? How society can contribute to prevent family violence?
I think one of the main things is to talk about it. It sounds very simple, but it's the main thing because it's such a silent thing. They called it the silent pandemic during, COVID. The victims, they stay in these situations forever and they don't seek help. They don't talk about it. So I think starting to talk about family violence is very, very important. I think on both sides, I think victims should find somebody where they feel comfortable, where they can start to talk about it and make maybe plans to stay safe if ever the danger increases a lot. And I think when the victims do speak out, we need to believe them. And this is, again, it might sound very silly, but a lot of times when the women speak out, they are not believed. And there's a good reason for this. The reason is because a lot of times the abusive men, in order to hide, their behavior at home, they are a completely different person on the outside. Okay, in front of neighbors, colleagues, on the street, they are perfect gentlemen. They are perfect gentlemen. So a lot of times when a woman does speak up about it, she's not believed. So it's very important to believe them because it's very rare that somebody lies about such an issue. The other thing I would say is that as a society, if we suspect it, if we hear noises coming from our neighbors, we need to do something. It's not a private matter. A lot of times when the women actually get killed and we see it on the news, all the neighbors say, oh, we heard the fights, we heard her screaming, but we didn't want to get involved. It wasn't our issue. It was a private thing. If she wanted to leave, she would leave. But everybody feels bad at that point for not having interfered, but it's too late. So the least we can do is call the police. The least we can do. Okay, because you can save a life. And that we also have limits, because it is very dangerous situation. So I'm not telling people to go knock on the door and confront the violent person because it's dangerous. And at the same time, we're not social workers to grab the victim and convince her to leave. It's going to happen when she's ready. But the least we can do is to call the police, and I give one example a lot of times. A lot of times people say, well, if she wants to leave, she will leave. She can grab the phone and call. I had a personal incident where my own neighbor, she was a young girl, she spoke the language here, and from the immediately when she moved in, there was an incident of violence, and we called the police. And only then, throughout the day, when the police came and they started intervening, did we realize she had no phone. She had no phone. A lot of times the abusers, they restrict access to the phone. And she told us she had 10 cell phones and he kept breaking all her cell phones. So again, you can't say, oh, she can call. Literally, some women have no access to a telephone to call. And, like in this situation, she was so grateful that somebody did something to help her and save her life.
True, very true. person should respond their they need to respond. They have to take their responsibility basically. Okay, recently an incident reported in London, Ontario, in which four people are killed by a young truck driver. Do you think society is ready to play its role against any kind of violence?
Well, any kind of violence is unacceptable. I mean, you can't accept that. You can't take somebody's life. Now, this is not conjugal violence, I believe what you said, right? So it's also a very different dynamic. I think people are more likely, unfortunately, to take a stand against violence like this. But for some reason, but they should definitely. But I think when it comes to conjugal violence, it's also much harder for people to take a stand against it, because in a way the abuser can be a loved one. It can be my son, it can be, my brother. So it's very hard to take a stand against conjugal violence, but it shouldn't be an issue because somebody's life is in danger. And the same thing for the victim, the same thing for victims. I think if me or you are attacked in the street by a stranger, if a stranger kicks us and pulls our hair, we're going to grab the phone and call the police. But if it's our spouse, it's a much more difficult call to make when it is, our husband or somebody we love. So taking responsibility of conjugal violence on both sides, I think it is a much harder thing than, let's say, street violence and any other type of violence.
Okay, Polly, it has been observed globally after COVID-19 lockdown, and economic situation is also a major factor of increase in domestic violence cases in pandemic. What would you say about that?
Well, this was very interesting, and I'm very glad you brought it up. Yes, conjugal violence did increase all over the world. We saw cases escalate in every single country around the world. And there's a very interesting explanation to this. First of all, it shows us an interesting thing. It shows us that conjugal violence happens everywhere. Okay, it affected all countries, rich countries, poor countries, Western countries, industrialized countries, countries of all religions, of all cultures. Okay, so in a way, it was wonderful. It's sad, but it's great, because for once, maybe people see that it has nothing to do with poverty, education, money, religion, absolutely nothing. And when we look at why, though, what was the common global factor? It was isolation. It was isolation. And like I said before, the abusers will try to isolate their victim, because again, if the victim is isolated, it's easier to have power and control over them. So if she can't see her friends, she's isolated. If she can't go to work, she's isolated. If she can't attend any classes, she's isolated. If she can't practice her religion and go to the mosque or the church, she doesn't have her community around her, she's isolated. So all types of violence, like I mentioned before, have an aspect of isolation. And the pandemic, during the pandemic, we were all isolated. It was the common global factor. And it created the perfect environment for the abusers to have power and control over the women, over the victims.
Okay, one last question, Polly. Is the government encouraging the individuals and group of people who are working against family violence?
Yes, definitely. And I think all governments need to take a stand. We saw it during COVID. They did take a stand because violence was escalating everywhere. And I know it was a very difficult situation, aside from putting measures and protocols to keep people safe from COVID, they were trying to make protocols and procedures to keep the women safe too. Sometimes the only places that were open were the grocery stores or the pharmacies. And there was always like a little kiosk or a little corner set up in the pharmacies and the groceries about information for victims of conjugal violence. So yes, they took a stand there to reach out to the victims and communities, but it has to be ongoing, not just during a period of crisis. This has to be ongoing, and public awareness campaigns have to continue, and services to victims need to continue to grow as well. And we have to reach the women and give them different options, and to show them that they can choose what is best for them, so that it is the easiest for them, because it is a very hard thing. And some women don't want to go to a shelter, but there should be other options, because we know it's a very scary thing to pack up and go and end up in a place, full of strangers. For some women, calling the police is, a very scary thing. She's willing to leave, but she doesn't want to call the police. So women should have a lot of options to see what is best for her and for her children. And she should have the support of her community and neighbors and just society at large to make this easier, because it's really a life and death situation.
Very true, very true. Thank you so much, Polly, for your precious time. Thank you so much. Keep watching Voice of Canada for further updates. Visit our website voiceofcanada.tv.